there is a there's a lot of anger in Iran. The Saudis have sent a message to Iran actually claiming that we did not even participate in the airstrikes. So they're saying that the Americans did it. But when the airstrikes were carried out, that's not what they said. So the Iranians are looking into this to see how credible this claim is by the Saudis. But it obviously shows how worried the Saudi regime is about the future. And remember, Saudi Arabia, Nima, its name is called Saudi Arabia. It's named after a family, the Saud family. That is not a an entity that people are going to sacrifice themselves for, a country that's named after a family. But anyway, and also we have Yemen, which carried out a strike today against the Saudi regime, striking from what I've just heard before uh, coming onto your show, a radar installation. So, which means that they're preparing for future attacks, obviously.
The Middle East may appear quieter today, but according to today's guest, that calm could be temporary. He argues that retaliation is still unfolding. Political pressure is mounting, and the next phase of this crisis could extend well beyond the region. Whether or not you agree with his conclusions, his warning is clear. The decisions made in the coming days could have consequences for global security and the economy.
He doesn't want the MOU, obviously, but that's that's the only thing that's on the table. But Iran won't accept the MOU in its current form. Iran will accept the MOU plus, and so, for example, Yemen, Gaza will be more bold in the uh, negotiations. The issue of the siege on Yemen has to be resolved. The ceasefire in Gaza has to be resolved. Although, the problem with Gaza is that regional countries, as you know, went to Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh, and they had they basically endorsed Trump. The leaders of Muslim countries in the region and other countries beyond the region, they went and endorsed Trump and his fake ceasefire, and they basically allowed the Israelis to occupy well over 50% of Gaza, the Israeli regime. And since the ceasefire, we've had probably well over 1,200, maybe 1,300 murders by the Israeli regime. The last couple of days were particularly bloody. I think the day before yesterday, 8 children were among the people who were slaughtered in Gaza. So there's no ceasefire. But thanks to the leaders of the region who, it's well known, and anyone can go and look and see who was there, who went and endorsed Trump and who whitewashed Trump and who became guarantors of this supposed guarantors of this ceasefire, and they praised Trump in the written document. It makes it more difficult for Iran to make demands with regards to Gaza because these countries effectively force Hamas to accept the ceasefire, and they endorsed Trump. So Gaza is an issue, but Iran is going to be more harsh when it comes to the Gaza issue. And as I said, the issue about Yemen will have to be resolved. But also, Iran will demand certain things upfront. For example, I mean, again, I'm speculating, but Iran's stolen assets will have to be uh, released. This because we saw in the MOU, Trump basically he was not serious, as we expected. He was not serious in implementing the MOU, and he carried out none of his obligations except for lifting the siege, basically. But that was for his own selfish gains. It was because of the shortage of energy. So, yeah, Trump is not going to gain anything through threats, and he's not going to gain anything if he does carry out his threats. It is quite possible that, because it's Trump, it's quite possible that he will do something crazy and that he will launch major attacks on Iranian critical infrastructure, even though he backed down 5 times at least in recent weeks. But um, nothing is impossible with this person in the White House.
The guest argues that diplomacy has stalled and that public threats have narrowed the available options. He suggests the biggest danger is not a planned escalation, but a miscalculation that could rapidly widen the conflict.
Well, Fars News Agency has pretty good access, and my advice is for your viewers to join their Telegram channel and to translate their. I don't know if they have an English Telegram channel. I'm sure they do, but the Persian one is obviously more detailed. But I'd look at their translations if they're that interested in keeping up with events. If they're not, I mean, your show is more, is quite good in your different guests and um, but if they want like the details, then they should like daily details, hourly details, minute by minute details, like General Rezai's interview that you alluded to last night. They can go to like the Fars News Agency or Tasnim or the others. But Fars News Agency put out this list of refineries and oil and gas installations across the Persian Gulf that would be the initial targets, and they were key assets of Saudi Arabia and the others. So that was basically that they are well connected. And I'm not saying that that is the only list or, but it's sending a message that look, we're going to destroy everything you have. If you target our electricity, we'll target your electricity because first of all, the United States has a presence in all these countries, and the United States continues to have a presence in Kuwait, contrary to what they're trying to imply. They have a strong presence in Bahrain, contrary to what they're implying in the media, and they have a strong presence in northern Iraq. Uh, they moved some things around, and some key assets were removed from these areas, but they have a strong presence. Have no one should have any doubt that like they and think that they just left the region. That's nonsense. So um, since the Americans are there, those installations are key to the U.S. presence. But also, so if there's no electricity in Kuwait, U.S. forces in Kuwait or U.S. forces in Qatar or in the Emirates or in Saudi Arabia, they won't be able to maintain a presence. I mean, they can use, um, uh, you know, some. Uh, they can stay around using their own capabilities for a while, but it's not sustainable. You cannot just, maintain a military presence with a few with small generators and constantly using fuel to fill them up. So if the power plants in these countries are destroyed, that's devastating for the U.S. armed forces. But also, all these countries are complicit in this war. We've gone over this multiple times. Your viewers know this. These countries are collaborators in this war. At the beginning of the war, they were willing collaborators. They thought that they were on the winning team. They made a bad choice. They were on the losing side. Now, they may grumble today and beg Trump not to continue the war, but they haven't kicked him out of their country. They haven't kicked the American forces out. Grumbling, but allowing the Americans to use their territory to fire rockets and missiles or to bomb Iran or to refuel fighter jets, that's war. That's an act of war. So if Trump does carry out the threat, as we've discussed before, the Iranian response will be decisive. And whether it's in these countries or the Israeli regime, all-out war will mean that Iran will treat the Americans very differently.
The discussion shifts from diplomacy to military strategy. The guest outlines what he believes could happen if fighting expands, arguing that regional infrastructure and U.S. military positions would become increasingly important.
Well, this madman is also saying that Israel is the second most important country with regards to artificial intelligence. So either the United States, or more importantly, China, has been surpassed by this regime. No one should take him seriously. He's also a serial liar, and he's been unable to even take Gaza. He's been unable to defeat Hezbollah. He's been unable to defeat Yemen. uh, and of course, he's been defeated by Iran. And we know why Iran has not struck the Israeli regime during the past few weeks. First of all, the fight was over the Strait of Hormuz. And for Iran, it has to win in the Strait of Hormuz. So that's the focus. The focus is on the United States and all those assets of the United States that are fighting to take the Strait of Hormuz from the Iranian people. So that's Iran's priority. Second of all, Iran during this period has been destroying all of those radar systems and all those air defense systems, those layers that the United States has created to help the Israeli regime, whether in northern Iraq or across the Persian Gulf or in Jordan and to the west of Saudi Arabia. So in future, when there is war between Iran and the Zionist regime, it's going to be blind. Of course, the U.S. radar stations in Turkey exist. The United States will continue to obviously do what it can, but it's not going to be like before. And third, while Iran does not initiate strikes, I mean the Israelis would that's a general ideological belief. And some say that in this recent battle with the United States, Iran carried out preemptive strikes. That's not really the case. There was never a ceasefire. Just because the Americans stopped and said we've stopped, that doesn't dictate terms to Iran. There is no ceasefire as we speak, and I think General Rezai said that, or someone said that just a few hours ago.
Yeah, he
There's
said
no
that. General
ceasefire.
Reza said that.
Yeah, so there's no ceasefire between us and the United States for us to be attacking preemptively. No, they constantly carry out initiate war, they initiate escalation, but there was no ceasefire. And so the Iranians continue to strike the US targets wherever they see that it's a threat to Iran or there's a threat emerging from. So Iran is not preemptive. These are not preemptive attacks. These are, but in general, Iran does not initiate conflict. That's ideologically speaking, it's very difficult for Iran. Even though as I said, we don't have a ceasefire though with the United States, and the siege itself is an act of war. But I think the most important issue right now for Iran is the elections in Israel. And the Iranians see that there's a crisis inside Israel. That's why that's why Netanyahu is saying all this nonsense. The regime has lost the war. Israelis know they lost the war. The polls show that they know they lost the war. But Iran wants to see this crisis play out.
Here, the interview turns to Israel. The guest argues that current military decisions are part of a longer strategic calculation and claims both sides are weighing their next moves carefully rather than rushing toward immediate escalation.
And so they will swiftly recognize that they made a bad mistake if Trump escalates. But in any case, whether he escalates or not, or whether he backs down, the Iranian position in relative terms is stronger than it was when the MOU was agreed upon and signed. So Iran's demands will be more than the MOU, and not just more than the MOU. It'll be the way in which the MOU is implemented would be different. In other words, Iran will not do anything until the United States actually carries out commitments. So every day that goes by, it makes things worse for the United States. And some people are saying that this war the United States may carry it on for years until the end of the Trump presidency. I'm not sure about that, because I think that the global economy, when it begins to collapse, and again, we can see these rumblings in Tokyo, when the global economy begins to collapse, I don't think it will be sustainable for the United States to continue this war when it collapses. So, and that's where we're going. Apparently, Trump does not have the will to pull out of this war before calamity strikes. So, when the global economy falls, and we don't know when it will be, but it will happen, then I think the United States will have to pull out. I don't think the American people will tolerate it anymore, even if the United States carries out a false flag operation. And that is something that I think is quite possible for the Israeli regime in the United States. Carry out a major cyber attack and blame it on Iran, carry out a major attack on civilians in the United States and blame it on Iran to mobilize, if not the entire American people, but the MAGA base. When the global economy, I mean, even the false flag operation, I don't think is going to do the trick, because when the global economy collapses, I think even MAGA will collapse.
What has happened with Yemen that they decided to confront Saudi Arabia and the United States? And whenever they're talking about these are proxies of Iran, and we have to understand what is the nature, what is the reality between Iran and Yemen, between Iran and Hezbollah. The same thing is happening in southern Lebanon. Israel is attacking and just destroying some parts of southern Lebanon and some villages, cities, and Ali Tahir, mountains were, hit by, missiles. Just in the last 2 days, they were hitting large areas with missiles. And this is the question: is Iran going to tell Hezbollah what to do, or it's all about Hezbollah and their, sort of policy and decision when it comes to confrontation with Israel? What is that?
The major problem in the West is just like they underestimate Iran. They don't understand Iran's sophistication, how sophisticated Iran is. It's how its defense doctrine, how sophisticated it is, how its military industry, how sophisticated it is, how sophisticated the state institutions are, how steadfast and how politically aware its people are. They don't understand the relationship between Iran and these entities. They don't understand that Hezbollah is not a proxy. Whenever you hear they say Iran's proxies, you can tell that they don't know what they're talking about. As soon as they say proxy, just you have to start ignoring them or taking what they say with a grain of salt at least. These are not proxies; these are allies.
The guest broadens the discussion beyond the battlefield, linking military escalation with wider regional alliances and arguing that the consequences could extend far beyond the countries directly involved.
Iran has no economic ambitions in Yemen, nor in Lebanon, nor in Afghanistan. I mean, one of the interesting things, and I've said this before, I don't know if I've said this on your show, but in Syria, Iran fought against ISIS and Al Qaeda, and rightly so. And so these, like the Saudis and the Qataris and Erdogan and the Emirates and their propaganda machine, they would say this is a sectarian war. The Iranians are supporting. Iran never cared about Assad. I mean, Assad's wife was Sunni, but Iran didn't care if he was Alawite or Sunni, or Shia or Christian or Druze or Kurd. It didn't matter to Iran. The issue was that the Americans were opposed to him. He was no saint. His government was wasn't a government that was ideal to Iran, but it was like in Cuba. Iran supports Cuba. Iran supported Venezuela, and hopefully one day the Venezuelans will rise up. But Iran supported Syria because of the U.S. empire, the Zionists trying to undermine it. So it's a war against the empire. Iran sacrificed for Syria. It didn't gain anything, but it wanted to keep the axis of resistance strong. So those people who were saying this is sectarian, they were talking nonsense. What's the evidence? I often say Bosnia, for example, Iran saved Bosnia, Sunnis. But most importantly, in Afghanistan, and this is something that Iran, the Taliban, when the first generation of the Taliban, they were brutal and they were genocidal, and they slaughtered Iranians in Mazar Sharif, and they slaughtered minorities. But after 9/11, and when the U.S. went and overthrew Al Qaeda, and then back then I thought, in Iran, everyone thought that Al Qaeda did 9/11 and it was just them, and they took claim for it. Years later, it gradually emerged that the 9/11 was much more complicated than that, and I think probably Iran's reaction would have been very different if they had known that. And anyway, I back then I used to ignore people who would say that 9/11, those people were dancing in New York and all those other things. I mean, people should go and watch Tucker Carlson's documentary on 9/11, and they'll know that it wasn't just these people. I mean, these tools were used just as they were used in Syria, just as they were used in Libya, and so on, but it wasn't just them. So in any case, In Afghanistan, the first generation of the Taliban were brutal, but after the Americans took over, a new generation came. And even though Iran has huge differences with them over women's rights, over schools and education, but in any case, Iran began supporting them. Who got angry with Iran? Many Tajiks, the Persian speakers, many Shias, many Uzbeks, those who were victims of the Taliban or who were, but Iran was saying that the chief evil is the empire, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Palestine, wherever, whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's in Cuba, it's the empire. If the empire is defeated, all these issues can be much more easily resolved among them. So Iran supported the Taliban. So, if anyone says, here, why did Iran do this? Iran did the same thing in Afghanistan. So, no, Iran doesn't have any ambitions beyond its own borders. Its borders are big enough. It's big enough, and there's enough mismanagement in this country as it is. It's managing this. They're not doing a tremendous job in managing the economic and social and cultural affairs of this country. It's not an ideal situation. So Iran has more than enough territory. I mean, it has exactly what it needs, and that's how it will remain.
Throughout this interview, the guest has argued that the conflict is no longer just about one country or one military confrontation. From his perspective, it's becoming a broader struggle over regional influence, energy routes, and global power. Whether you agree with his analysis or not, one thing is clear. The coming weeks could shape far more than the Middle East. If tensions continue to rise, the effects may be felt in global markets, energy prices, and international security. The biggest question now isn't what happened today, it's what happens next.